Emma Carter had always dreamed of owning a farm. After years of working as an agricultural scientist, she finally saved enough to buy a small, 5-acre plot in the upscale neighborhood of Maplewood Estates. The real estate agent assured her that the Homeowners Association, HOA, rules allowed for sustainable living and gardening. Emma envisioned a peaceful life, growing organic produce and raising a few chickens. She named her farm Green Haven. The first few months were blissful. Emma planted rows of heirloom tomatoes, rainbow carrots, and specialty herbs. She built a small chicken coop and introduced a flock of heritage chickens. The farm was her sanctuary, a place where she could escape the chaos of the world. But her tranquility was short-lived. One crisp morning, Emma stood frozen in her doorway as 5 strangers wandered through her vegetable garden. A little boy pointed at her prized rooster while his mother snapped pictures on her phone. None of them had asked for permission to be on her land. "Excuse me," Emma called out, trying to keep her voice friendly. "This is private property." The woman looked up, confused. "But the sign says this is the Maplewood Community Farm Experience. Open to all residents." Emma's stomach dropped. She rushed to the edge of her property and saw a freshly installed wooden placard with fancy lettering. Maplewood Community Farm and Zoo. All residents welcome. Daily 9 to 5. She hadn't put it there. Someone had marked her private farm as public property overnight. Emma quickly realized who was behind this. The Maplewood HOA, led by the formidable Diane Harper. Diane had made it clear from the beginning that she didn't approve of Emma's farm. She had sneered at Emma's moving boxes of gardening supplies and commented that she hoped Emma wouldn't ruin the neighborhood aesthetic. Emma spent the afternoon checking her property deed and HOA documents. Nothing gave the HOA the right to declare her farm a public space. She removed the sign and brought it inside as evidence. That evening, her doorbell rang. Diane stood there in a crisp pantsuit, her smile not reaching her eyes. Behind her were 2 other HOA board members. "We noticed you removed our community sign," Diane said without greeting. "The sign incorrectly labeled my private property as public space," Emma replied calmly. "I never agreed to that." Diane's smile tightened. "When you purchased in Maplewood, you agreed to all HOA covenants. Section 12.3 clearly states that unique landscape features visible from common areas can be designated as community enhancement zones. Your animals and crops qualify." Emma took a deep breath. "First, my chickens are clean and legal under county regulations. Second, nothing in the HOA documents allows you to grant public access to private property without owner consent." Diane's smile vanished. "We've made our decision. The sign goes back up tomorrow, or you'll face daily fines of $200 for each violation." She handed Emma a folder thick with papers. Inside were photos of her property with circles around her chicken coop, vegetable beds, rainwater collection system, and compost bins. Each was labeled as a violation with corresponding HOA rules that had been stretched beyond recognition. Emma stayed up past midnight reading her property deed, county regulations, and HOA bylaws. What she discovered gave her hope. Diane had overstepped. But fighting back would require careful planning. The next morning, cars began arriving at 9 a.m. sharp. Families with excited kids walked straight up her driveway as if they owned the place. The sign had reappeared overnight, now with a laminated schedule of farm experience hours. A woman with twins approached Emma. "Are you the farmer? The newsletter said you'd show the children how to collect eggs and pick vegetables for a small donation fee." Emma's blood boiled. Diane was charging people to trespass on her property. She quickly did the math. 40 families at 15 each was 600. The HOA was collecting money without her knowledge or consent. "I'm sorry, but there's been a misunderstanding," Emma explained. "This is my private home, not a public farm." The woman's face fell. "But we already paid the HOA activity fee." Diane collected $15 from each family for the farm experience. Emma invited the woman inside and showed her the property documents. "I'm going to resolve this with the HOA, but you should ask for your money back." The woman sighed. "Diane runs the board like her personal kingdom. Most people are too afraid to challenge her." Emma put up her own sign, "Private property. No trespassing." Information incorrectly published. But people kept coming, confused and disappointed. Some were understanding, but others grew angry, saying Emma was ruining their weekend plans. That afternoon, Emma drove around the neighborhood, taking photos of Diane's house and other board members' properties. She spotted at least a dozen violations, more serious than her farm, from unauthorized paint colors to prohibited structures. Knowledge was power, and Emma needed all the ammunition she could gather. As she pulled back into her driveway, Diane was waiting, arms crossed. Behind her, two maintenance workers were reinstalling the community farm sign. "Remove that sign from my property now," Emma said firmly. "This isn't just your property anymore," Diane smiled coldly. "The HOA has voted to designate this area a community resource. Section 15.2 gives us that authority." "I've read Section 15.2, Emma countered. "It applies only to common areas and requires owner consent. We have community needs that supersede your personal preferences," Diane shot back. "The sign stays. The tours continue. Fight us, and we'll make your life very difficult." Emma realized this wasn't just about property rights or farming. This was about power and control. Diane had no idea who she was messing with, or that Emma held a secret that would shock everyone in Maplewood Estates. Early Saturday morning, Emma drove to Wilson's Market, the main grocery store serving Maplewood. Mr. Wilson himself was arranging a display of fresh produce when she arrived. "There's my star supplier," he called out cheerfully. "Your rainbow carrots sold out in 2 hours yesterday. When can I get more?" Emma smiled, noting two women from the HOA board selecting vegetables nearby. They didn't know she could hear them. "These tomatoes are amazing," one said. "I've never tasted anything this fresh from a grocery store." Little did they know, they were praising Emma's unsightly farm's harvest. "Mr. Wilson," Emma said loudly enough for them to hear, "I may have trouble meeting our contract next month. Some folks from the Maplewood HOA are causing problems with my farm." The women froze, turning slowly in Emma's direction. Mr. Wilson frowned. "That would be terrible. Your produce is why customers choose us over the superstore on Main Street. My business would suffer without your deliveries." Emma nodded. "I'd hate to let you down, but they're claiming my farm violates HOA rules. They've even started bringing tour groups onto my private property without permission." By now, the board members were listening openly, recognition dawning on their faces. "Wait," one woman approached cautiously. "Are you saying you grow the produce for Wilson's?" "I supply about 60% of their fresh vegetables," Emma confirmed, "plus the herbs and specialty items for Harvest Table Restaurant and the organic section at Morton's Grocery." The women exchanged alarmed glances. Harvest Table was the fancy restaurant where the HOA held their monthly dinner meetings. Morton's delivered groceries to half the neighborhood. "I had no idea," the second woman said. "Diane told us your farm was an eyesore, bringing down property values." "Interesting," Emma said. "Did Diane also mention she's collecting $15 per family for unauthorized tours of my property?" Their shocked expressions told her everything. They hurried out, already on their phones. Back home, Emma found another tour group being led around her property by a teenage girl she'd never seen before. The girl was pointing at Emma's chicken coop, telling visitors that the farm lady will let you hold the chickens for an extra $5. "Absolutely not," Emma interrupted. "These animals are not playthings, and no one has permission to be here." The girl looked confused. "But Mrs. Harper hired me to give tours while she's at her salon appointment. She gave me this badge and everything." She showed Emma an official-looking ID card that read Maplewood Estates Community Guide. Emma took photos of the badge and asked the group to leave, explaining the situation. Most were understanding, though disappointed. One elderly man lingered behind. "I'm Gerald Matthews," he introduced himself. "Lived here 30 years, since before the development expanded. Been watching this situation with interest. Nice to meet you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." Emma shook his hand. "Thank you for your support." Gerald leaned on his cane. "You should know, Diane and her husband Michael have been grabbing power in this community for years. They're planning to develop the green space behind your property for condos. Your farm doesn't fit their vision." This new information clicked into place. Emma's property bordered the last undeveloped woodland in the area. If they could force her out, they'd have a larger connected parcel for development. "Thank you for telling me," Emma said. "Do others know about these plans?" "Most folks are too busy to pay attention," Gerald sighed. "They just write their HOA checks and hope to avoid Diane's wrath." After Gerald left, Emma drove to the county records office to research property maps and zoning regulations. What she discovered was gold. The entire area, including her farm, was designated as a protected agricultural heritage zone due to its history as farmland. Any development would require special permits and public hearings. That evening, as Emma returned home, she found Diane and Michael supervising workers installing permanent pathway markers across her front field. "Stop immediately," Emma called out. "You have no right to build anything on my property." Michael Thompson approached, his developer's smile firmly in place. "We're just installing some simple pathways to make the community farm experience safer for visitors. The board approved the expense yesterday." "I never consented to this," Emma stated firmly. "Remove these markers now, or I'll report this as criminal trespassing and destruction of property." Diane joined her husband. "Don't be difficult. This could benefit everyone. Your little garden can be educational for the community, and we'll feature it in our neighborhood brochure. This little garden supplies most of the fresh produce to businesses in this area," Emma informed them, "including your favorite restaurants." Michael laughed dismissively. "You're exaggerating. Our restaurants get deliveries from major suppliers." Emma pulled out her phone and showed them her contracts with local businesses: Wilson's Market, Harvest Table Restaurant, Morton's Grocery, Fresh Start Cafe. "I supply them all." The color drained from Diane's face. "That's impossible. Those are the top food establishments in the area. I'm an agricultural scientist with 15 years of experience developing high-yield organic growing methods," Emma explained. "Why do you think my vegetables look so good? It's not a hobby, it's my business." Michael's businessman instincts kicked in. "Wait, so you're running a commercial farm in a residential area? That's definitely against HOA rules." "Actually, it's not," Emma countered, showing them county documents. "This entire development sits on what's legally designated as a protected agricultural heritage zone. My farm is specifically permitted under both county regulations and your own HOA founding documents." "What founding documents?" Diane snapped. "The original HOA covenant from when Maplewood was established," Emma smiled. "Gerald Matthews pointed me in the right direction. Did you know he kept copies of everything when he served on the original board 30 years ago?" Michael's expression hardened. "Those old documents are superseded by our current rules." "Not according to county law," Emma replied. "And definitely not according to the state agricultural protection statutes that prevent HOAs from restricting pre-existing agricultural uses." Diane's phone rang. After a brief conversation, she turned to Michael, whispering urgently. His face showed growing alarm. "Is something wrong?" Emma asked innocently. "Harvest Table just called," Diane said stiffly. "They claimed their produce delivery was canceled because of some dispute with their supplier." "How unfortunate," Emma replied. "I heard they're fully booked this weekend. Imagine disappointing all those customers with a limited menu." Michael assessed Emma with new respect and concern. "Perhaps we've gotten off on the wrong foot. Let's discuss this like reasonable people." "I'm always reasonable," Emma said. "Starting with you removing these markers and that sign, then retracting the community farm experience from your newsletter with a full explanation and refund to everyone who paid." "And in return?" Michael asked cautiously. "I'll consider resuming deliveries to businesses in the area, including your restaurant," Emma replied. "But first, we need to be clear about boundaries, both property and authority." As the workers began removing the markers, Emma noticed HOA board members and neighbors gathering at the edge of her property, watching with interest. Word was spreading fast. What Diane and Michael didn't know was that Emma had invited the local newspaper to do a feature on urban farming success stories. Tomorrow, their reporter was eager to hear about community challenges facing small-scale agriculture. How would the Harpers react when their HOA tactics made front-page news? The next morning, Emma woke up to a loud banging outside her bedroom window. She peeked through the curtains to see 4 men in green uniforms hammering a huge wooden sign into her front yard. The sign read, "Maplewood Estates Community Farm and Zoo. Open daily 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Emma ran outside, still in her pajamas, and confronted the workers. "Stop that right now. This is my private property." The workers looked at each other nervously. One of them, a younger man with a red cap, spoke up. "Sorry, ma'am. We're just following orders from the HOA board. I don't care whose orders they are. This is my land. You can't put signs on it without my permission. The oldest worker shrugged. You'll have to take it up with Miss Harper. We just do what we're told. They finished installing the sign and left. Emma tried to pull it out herself, but they had cemented it deep into the ground. Her phone rang. It was her friend Tyler from the local hardware store. Hey, just wanted to warn you. Diane's been telling everyone in town that your farm is now open to the public. She's handing out flyers at the coffee shop. Emma's stomach sank. Before she could even change out of her pajamas, cars started pulling into her driveway. Families piled out with picnic baskets and cameras, some carrying empty containers like they were going berry picking. Welcome to the farm, a woman called out cheerfully, waving at Emma as her 3 kids ran straight toward the chicken coop. Excuse me, Emma said, trying to sound calm though her heart was racing. This is not a public farm. This is my private home. The woman looked confused. But the newsletter said, and there's a sign right there. I didn't authorize any of that, Emma explained. By noon, her yard was filled with strangers. Children pressed their faces against her windows. A group of teenagers were chasing her chickens. Emma found a woman picking her prize squash and filling a large basket. Those are not free for the taking, Emma said, trying to keep her voice steady. Those are my crops that I sell to local businesses. The woman looked at her like she was crazy. Diane said this is a community source now. It was in the email update. Emma tried calling Malcolm Jenkins, the HOA president, 6 times. He didn't answer. She left messages explaining the situation, her voice getting more urgent each time. At 3 p.m., Emma found 2 boys climbing her apple trees, breaking branches. When she asked them to stop, their mother snapped. The sign says this is a community farm. That means these are community trees. By evening, Emma's beautiful farm was trampled. Vegetable beds were destroyed, half her ripe produce stolen. Her chickens were so stressed they had hidden under the coop and stopped laying. Emma changed into her best outfit, clean jeans, a pressed button-up shirt, and her nicest boots. She gathered all her important papers, property deed, agricultural permits, business licenses, and property surveys that clearly showed her boundaries. She put them in a folder and drove to the HOA meeting at the community center. The room was packed when she arrived. Malcolm sat at the front table with 4 other board members, including Diane, who wore a smug smile when she saw Emma. Our community farmer has arrived, Diane announced. We were just discussing the success of our new attraction. Emma raised her hand to speak. Malcolm nodded. I'd like to address the board about the illegal trespassing you've encouraged on my private property, Emma said clearly, holding up her folder of documents. Diane immediately interrupted. Point of order. We need to follow the agenda. Malcolm nodded. Let's finish our scheduled business first. For the next hour, Emma sat fuming as they discussed sidewalk repairs and community pool rules. People in the audience kept turning to look at her, some smiling, others whispering. She heard phrases like troublemaker and not a team player. Finally, Malcolm announced, now we'll discuss the community farm initiative. Diane stood up with a bright poster showing a map of Emma's property with walking paths drawn all over it. Everyone loves our new community attraction, she announced with a wide smile. We've received wonderful feedback about the educational opportunities for children. The board has voted to install permanent public pathways through the eastern section next month to improve access. Shocked whispers spread through the room. Some people nodded in approval, not understanding they were talking about stealing parts of Emma's private property. Emma stood up, gripping her documents tightly. Before you proceed with those plans, she said, keeping her voice calm and clear, you should know whose produce you've been enjoying at Green Leaf Market, Harvest Table Restaurant, and Morton's Grocery. The room fell completely silent. Emma pulled out her business contracts and held them up. These are my supply agreements with every major food business in this town. The organic tomatoes you love at Morton's? The special salad greens at Harvest Table Restaurant? I grow those. The fresh herbs and vegetables at Green Leaf Market come from my farm too. She looked directly at Diane. If my farm operation is disrupted or damaged by trespassers that you're inviting onto my land, none of these businesses will have the fresh local produce they depend on. Emma placed her contracts on the table in front of Malcolm. Would you like to see what happens to your favorite restaurants when their food supply suddenly disappears? Malcolm's mouth hung open as he stared at Emma's business contracts. The room buzzed with shocked whispers. Several people stood up to get a better look at the documents Emma had placed on the table. Is this some kind of joke? Diane snapped, her face turning red. You expect us to believe you're the supplier for all these businesses? The back door opened, and in walked Sam Garcia, the owner of Greenleaf Market. He hadn't attended an HOA meeting in years. It's true, Sam announced, walking to the front of the room. When that farm stops producing, my store loses 60% of its fresh produce. No other local source can match the quality or quantity. Diane crossed her arms. Well, we can just get produce shipped in from elsewhere. Jessica Martinez from Morton's Grocery stood up from her seat in the third row. At triple the cost, with half the freshness. Our customers specifically ask for the local organic veggies. They know the difference. Malcolm cleared his throat nervously. I'm sure we can find a reasonable solution. I've already found one, Emma interrupted, pulling another paper from her folder. This is a cease and desist letter from my lawyer. The sign comes down tomorrow. Anyone entering my property without permission will be trespassing. Any HOA member who encourages trespassing will be named in my lawsuit. She's bluffing, Diane hissed. Show me exactly where in the bylaws it says you can seize private property and open it to the public, Emma challenged. Malcolm flipped frantically through his copy of the HOA rules. There's a clause about, community aesthetics. That doesn't give you the right to steal my land or destroy my business, Emma said firmly. If I have to shut down because of this harassment, your food prices will double overnight. The nearest comparable organic farm is over 100 miles away. Malcolm's face turned bright red. This sounds like blackmail. This is business, Emma corrected him. I'm simply informing everyone how their actions affect our whole community. Diane jumped to her feet, her voice high and shrill. She's threatening us. This is exactly why we need to control this. This eyesore. A murmur ran through the crowd. People looked at each other, clearly uncomfortable. Suddenly, Jacob Reynolds stood up. Emma recognized him as the owner of Sunshine Bakery, the most popular breakfast spot in town. I need to speak, Jacob said. That farm supplies all the special wheat for my artisan breads. Nobody else grows the heritage varieties I need. Without that supply, I'd have to completely change my menu. Emma Kwan, whose catering business handled most local events, raised her hand. My entire herb selection comes from that farm. My clients specifically request those fresh flavors. If that supply disappeared, my business would suffer tremendously. One by one, other business owners in the room spoke up. The coffee shop that used Emma's berries in their popular muffins, the school that bought her vegetables for their cafeteria, the small health food store that relied on her seasonal produce. Diane's face grew darker with each testimony. This is ridiculous, Diane said. We're talking about proper community standards, not tomatoes. We're talking about our local economy, Sam from Greenleaf Market replied. That farm employs 4 part-time workers from our community too. Are you planning to find them new jobs? People began arguing loudly. Some defended Diane, saying property values were most important. Others supported Emma, talking about food quality and local businesses. Malcolm banged his gavel repeatedly. Order. We need order. Diane leaned over and whispered something in his ear. He nodded and cleared his throat. The board will need to reconsider this matter in light of this new information. In the meantime, we'll temporarily suspend the community farm initiative. That's not good enough, Jessica from Morton's Grocery interrupted. We need a guarantee that our supplier won't be harassed anymore. Malcolm looked flustered. We can't just abandon HOA standards completely. The debate grew heated again. Outside, thunder boomed. We'd been so focused on the argument that nobody had noticed the storm rolling in. Rain began hammering against the windows. Perhaps we should form a committee to review the situation, Malcolm suggested weakly. Perfect, Diane jumped in. I'll chair the committee. Absolutely not, Sam interrupted. You've shown clear bias against the farm. Any committee needs to be balanced. Lightning flashed, followed by a deafening crack of thunder. The lights flickered once, twice, then went completely dark. People gasped. Someone screamed. Cell phone flashlights clicked on, creating eerie shadows around the room. Meeting adjourned due to weather, Malcolm called out. We'll reschedule to continue this discussion. As people gathered their belongings in the dim light, Emma felt a gentle touch on her shoulder. She turned to see Eleanor Williams, the quiet elderly woman who lived 3 doors down from her. Eleanor's face looked ghostly in the blue glow of someone's phone light. "Don't leave yet," Eleanor whispered, her wrinkled hand gripping Emma's arm with surprising strength. "Meet me tomorrow at sunrise at the big oak tree on your property line." "Why? What do you know about this?" Emma asked, leaning closer. Eleanor's eyes darted toward Diane, who was huddled with Malcolm in the corner. "You're not the first farmer they've tried to push out," Eleanor whispered. "I have documents you need to see, things they don't want anyone to find." Before Emma could ask more questions, Eleanor shuffled away, disappearing into the crowd heading for the exit. Outside, rain poured down in sheets. People ran to their cars, holding jackets over their heads. Through the downpour, Emma spotted Diane arguing with Malcolm under the building's overhang. When Diane saw Emma watching, she pointed in her direction, her face twisted with anger. What secrets was Eleanor about to reveal that could turn this fight in Emma's favor? The next morning, Emma met Eleanor at the big oak tree on her property line. Eleanor clutched an old leather folder to her chest, her face pale but determined. "I couldn't sleep after what happened at that meeting," Eleanor said. "Those HOA vultures tried the same trick 30 years ago with my husband's farm." Emma's heart skipped. "You owned a farm here?" Eleanor nodded, pointing across the rolling landscape. "All this, every inch where those fancy houses now sit, was our family farmland for 3 generations. 40 beautiful acres of corn, tomatoes, and the sweetest strawberries you ever tasted." They reached the giant oak tree near Emma's eastern boundary. Eleanor touched its bark lovingly. "My husband proposed under this tree. It's the only thing they didn't cut down when they built Maplewood Estates." "So what happened to your farm?" Emma asked, watching Eleanor's face carefully. "Michael Harper's father happened." Eleanor's voice hardened. "He was a smooth-talking developer who promised the world. Said our farm would be the crown jewel of their new community. Swore they'd protect the agricultural character of the land." She opened her folder and pulled out yellowed papers and plastic sleeves. "They made us sign a special covenant as part of the deal. Read right here, paragraph 3. Emma squinted at the faded legal language. "Agricultural pursuits are to be recognized as historic land use and shall not be impeded by any current or future HOA regulations." Her jaw dropped. "This is still legally binding?" "You bet it is," Eleanor said with fierce pride. "Filed with the county, notarized, ironclad. After we sold, they tried to bury it. Michael's father came to my house after my husband died, offering money to update the agreement. I played dumb and kept my copies safe." "Does Diane know about this?" Emma asked, her mind racing with possibilities. "Oh, she knows," Eleanor said. "The Harpers have spent years trying to erase this covenant. They've already built on 3/4 of the protected land. Your farm is the last piece they need." As they turned to head back, Emma froze. Diane stood on her property with 3 men in polo shirts holding surveying equipment. Metal stakes with bright orange flags dotted Emma's vegetable garden. "What are you doing on my land?" Emma demanded, hurrying toward them. Diane's smile was sickly sweet. "Just marking the community pathways. The board approved construction starting Monday." "You can't do this," Emma said. "You have no legal right." "We have every right," Diane shot back. "Your continued violations have triggered Section 8.4 of the bylaws, allowing HOA modification of non-compliant properties." Eleanor stepped forward, her small frame suddenly commanding. "She knows about the original covenant." Diane's smile vanished. "That old thing? It was superseded years ago." "No, it wasn't," Eleanor replied calmly, patting her folder. "I kept the notarized original with the county seal. Never legally replaced or removed. Still binding on every inch of this land." The men with surveying equipment exchanged uncomfortable glances. "What's she talking about?" one asked. Before Diane could answer, her phone rang. Her face twisted with annoyance as she answered. "This isn't a good time." Her expression changed rapidly from irritation to shock. "What do you mean we have no produce for tonight? Call our backup supplier." Her voice rose. "What do you mean they can't deliver either?" Emma smiled as understanding dawned. "Problem with your restaurant, Diane?" Diane's eyes narrowed as she realized the connection. "You did this on purpose." "I simply paused deliveries to review my client contracts," Emma said innocently. "Funny how your husband's famous Harvest Table restaurant relies on my eyesore farm for its award-winning menu. Diane's phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, her face paling. 52 reservations tonight, she muttered. I wonder how those fancy Maplewood residents will feel when they learn who's really been feeding them all this time. Emma asked, watching her squirm. What would Diane choose? Her crusade against Emma's farm or her husband's business reputation? 3 days later, Emma and Eleanor watched as another expensive SUV pulled into Emma's driveway. The driver, a woman in designer yoga clothes who had previously wrinkled her nose at Emma's chickens, now beamed while holding out a homemade pie. I just wanted to thank you for those amazing heirloom tomatoes at Greenleaf Market, she gushed. I had no idea they came from here. My kids are dying to learn how you grow them. Word had exploded through Maplewood Estates about both Emma's farm supplying their food and Eleanor's bombshell revelation about the original covenant. Emma's phone buzzed constantly with messages from residents, local journalists, and even the mayor. Meanwhile, Harvest Table Restaurant was in chaos. Their social media was flooded with complaints about menu changes and canceled reservations. Sorry, limited menu due to supply issues, read the hastily printed sign on their door. Their famous farm-to-table reputation was crumbling by the hour. Diane must be having a meltdown, Emma said, waving goodbye to the yoga lady. Good, Eleanor replied with a satisfied smile. Sometimes people need their perfect world shaken up a bit. The doorbell rang again just as Emma finished feeding her chickens. She opened it to find Michael Harper himself standing there, looking nothing like the confident developer who usually zipped through the neighborhood in his luxury car. His perfectly styled hair was messy, his designer shirt wrinkled. May I come in? He asked, his voice oddly humble. Emma led him into her kitchen but remained standing. If you're here about Diane's ridiculous HOA violations. I'm here about our restaurant, he interrupted, rubbing his temples. And to apologize for my wife's enthusiasm. Enthusiasm. Emma crossed her arms. Is that what you call trying to steal my property and harassing me daily? Michael sank into a chair without asking. Look, Diane gets carried away with her vision for the community. She's passionate about keeping property values high. By turning my private farm into a petting zoo without my permission. He winced. That was poorly executed. But I'm here to make things right. He pulled out a glossy folder with community partnership embossed on the cover. I have a business proposition that solves everyone's problems. Emma raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. We need your produce desperately, he admitted. Our chef is threatening to quit. But you need protection from constant HOA battles. What if we formalized a relationship? He spread papers across Emma's table, showing beautifully designed logos and marketing materials. We create the Maplewood Farm Collective. You maintain full ownership and control of your property, but we market it properly as a community asset. Residents can subscribe to weekly produce boxes. The restaurant gets priority supply. Everyone wins. The idea wasn't terrible. And the HOA harassment stops immediately? Completely, Michael nodded eagerly. We'll remove those ridiculous signs today. Diane has agreed to step back from this issue entirely. That seemed too easy. Why the sudden change of heart? Michael's smile tightened. Let's just say the restaurant means a lot to us, and the covenant Eleanor found has complicated our plans. After Michael left, promising to send the final agreement tomorrow, Eleanor called almost immediately. Did I just see Michael Harper leaving your house? Emma told her about his proposal. Be extremely careful, Eleanor warned. 30 years I've known that family. They've never given up anything they wanted. Read every word of whatever they send you. Better yet, have a lawyer read it. The Harpers don't make deals, they set traps. Emma couldn't sleep that night, turning over Michael's offer in her mind. Around 2 a.m., she heard strange noises outside. Grabbing her flashlight, she rushed out to find her chicken coop's gate wide open and wire cutters on the ground. Her 20 hens had escaped and were scattered throughout the neighborhood. For the next hour, Emma chased chickens through perfectly manicured yards, apologizing to awakened neighbors as her birds destroyed flower beds and left droppings on patios. Just the kind of incident Diane needs, Emma muttered, finally capturing her last hen. As she turned to head home, she caught a glimpse of someone watching from behind a nearby hedge, a familiar shape in designer clothes slipping away into the darkness. Emma clutched the wire cutters she'd found, now noticing the monogram DH on the handle. Her blood boiled as she realized this wasn't over. It was just changing tactics. What else were the Harpers planning? And how far would they go to get her land? The next morning, Emma stared at the contract Michael had left. Her hands shook with anger as she read the fine print on page 6. Grantee agrees to transfer developmental rights of 60% of property to Maplewood HOA after 24 months. They weren't offering partnership. They were trying to steal her land, legally. Emma's phone buzzed. It was Eleanor. Did you read it? Every word, Emma replied. They're trying to take my land. I told you, Eleanor said. The Harpers don't make deals. They set traps. Emma took a deep breath. What do I do now? Fight back, Eleanor said firmly. You have the covenant, the community, and the truth on your side. Don't let them win. Emma nodded, her resolve hardening. I won't. The battle for Green Haven was far from over, but Emma knew one thing for certain. She would never give up her farm without a fight. The Harpers had underestimated her, but they would soon learn that Emma Carter was not just a farmer. She was a force to be reckoned with. As the sun rose over her fields, Emma smiled. The last harvest was just the beginning. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story on Store of Good Stories. If this story touched your heart or made you think, don't forget to hit like and share the video to spread this positive message to more people. And if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the meaningful stories we share every week. Your support is the biggest motivation for Store of Good Stories to keep bringing heartfelt and valuable stories to you. See you in the next video.